All right, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's lecture. Our lecture tonight is Theater in Colonial Mexico. Tonight's lecture is part of the Huapahua Period America Lecture Series, which is a monthly series that promotes the study of North, South, and Central American cultures within the SCA period. Our lecture series is a continuation of the Huapahua New World Symposiums, which started during the pandemic and continued yearly for 4 years. The symposium over our lifetime has hosted over 40 instructors and welcomed over 700 students from every kingdom in the known world. So I'll give you a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Firstly, our lectures are all recorded, so we ask that guests either raise their hand and wait for the instructor to call on them or leave comments and questions in the chat. This will keep the recording nice and clean for those of us, for those who aren't able to join us tonight. And then secondly, in joining our lectures or interacting with any of our content, you are agreeing to our zero tolerance policy for racism, xenophobia, colorism, and other forms of discrimination. If you have concerns about any attendee or lecturer, I hope that you will reach out to me and let me know what your concerns are. My email address is in the chat and in the description below if you are watching us on YouTube. Um, Thirdly, we are also looking for additional instructors for months to come, specifically for December and then January of 2026. So if you have a topic that you would like to teach, if you would please reach out to me. Again, I will provide my content or my contact information in the chat as well as in the description box. I will also announce here that we are going to be having an October lecture on the topic of Aztec legends of the afterlife. Our tentative date for that will be October 24th. But of course, we'll update on all of our regular socials to let you know what time and when that will take place. So I will turn over our lecture now to our instructor, Katherine, and she will take us through our class today.
Hello. Hi there. So my name is Katherine Garlick, or in the SCA, the Honorable Katherine Coscombe. Just Katherine is good. I am mundanely a theater professor at Youngstown State University. And so this class developed when I was trying to figure out what kind of theater happens in the Americas during the SCA period. And the surprising answer that I found is the best documented and really only extant recorded theater that we have in the Americas before 1600 was in Mexico. And the extant scripts are all in Nahuatl, which is the language of several tribes in central Mexico, most notably the Aztecs. When we talk about the history of theater, and especially early theater, and you've got theater started in ancient Greece. Theater is not, even in the ancient world, limited to ancient Greece. But the origins of theater and the limits of theater can get a little bit messy. And so what you tend to see almost universally is some level of performance, specifically embodied performance. The idea that the performer is taking on a persona or taking on a character, often with scripts, sometimes improvised lines, costuming, movement, all to help create this embodiment of somebody other than the performer themselves. And so there's a lot of religious ritual that includes performance, might even have scripts, might even have costuming. And so a lot of what we have documented in the Americas, especially in the pre-colonial period, is ritual. And one of the big characteristics of ritual is the concept of effaciousness. That is, in doing these actions, putting on these costumes, saying these words, doing this performance, the action of the ritual is going to do something. It might facilitate a seasonal change. It might bridge connections. Performance ritual, embodied performance, theatrical embodied performance in ritual very often has the costumed performer serving as some kind of mediator between the audience and the other world, whether it is the world of the gods, the world of the spirits, or the world of the ancestors. And so that idea of this performance is serving a function beyond telling a story. It's serving some kind of mystical function. That effaciousness tends to be where we draw the line between performative theatrical ritual and theater itself. So, some of the stuff we know about pre-colonial theatrical ritual, we see it both with the Maya and the Aztecs in Mexico. The Mayans, of course, were in southern Mexico on the Yucatan and into Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, primarily kind of in their most important stage between 1500 BCE and continuing through around 1000 in the Common Era. The big monumental classical period is somewhere between 250 and 950 Common Era. You've got lots of independent Maya kingdoms, but they are going to eventually fall to Spanish rule in 1697. And then the Aztec actually go a little bit earlier because you've got the last Aztec emperor in custody in 1524. So when we're looking at sort of where they are really falling underneath Spanish rule. We do know that the Maya had a lot of rituals built into their calendar. They had a very elaborate calendar based around a solar cycle, and there are rituals with lots of different events for like each of there's 18, 20-day months. And there are festivals with all of these. So for example, during the second month, Woe, you've got a festival for the god of fisherfolk and hunters. You've got a festival for the god of rain. You've got one to honor sacred texts. And in the urban centers, these festivals turn into massive spectacles. These big spectacles were performed on raised platforms in temples, and then you've got spectators gathered up in open air plazas. At these festivals, you might have up to 1,000 trained dancers, as well as thousands of people in the audience. The dancers were masked. You had musicians, you had choreography, and these would again serve to help bond the community and connect the audience and the performers to the gods through all of this performance and action. This idea of shared participation through the performance is a concept called mythixis, which you'll see talked about a lot in anthropology at the place of ritual. We also know that in the courts of the Maya, you would have staged entertainments at court. Again, a lot of spectacle here. Costumed actors, musicians, and dancers, often based on myths. The dancers would dress as quetzal birds, deer, armadillos, monkeys, other animals. The nobles themselves would often wear fantastic regalia and also dance. We've got paintings from these performances in pottery and on palace walls. There's some really nice examples at Bonampak in Mexico. There are also death rituals with the Maya, and the passage to the afterworld has a whole, again, very large, very public, very performative ritual associated with it. When it comes to the song lyrics and the dramatic orations that we've got pre-Spain, not a lot is known. We do know that we've got some surviving mythological texts from the 16th century that tell us at least some of the stuff that's in these myths, but what the script looked like in these reenactments at royal courts, we just don't have them. We don't have these extant. There's no scripts extant from these performances. Um, One of the longest surviving performance traditions from the Maya is the Japosh tune or the Rabanal Aki, um, the dance of the wooden drums. Now, in Rabanal in Guatemala, they are still performing this every January. And it's a dance drama, and it is basically both a commemoration and a reenactment of historical battles and historical conquests. Um, the earliest transcription of it, even though we've got records of it being performed during the Spanish colonial period, the earliest transcription we have is all the way from 1850. So our text for this is very late. It was later transcribed into French, and he witnessed a performance in 1856. One of the unusual things about this, especially for early theater or for theater where we're kind of not strongly influenced by the West, is the content is not particularly religious. Um, because again, it is focused on battle and hunting, and it talks about the social codes of conduct surrounding war and taking of prisoners. Um, you do have priests on stage. They're part of like just kind of the all of the people that are involved in these social codes. So you've got priests being portrayed. But again, it's not they're not doing a ritual. Um and that this might actually, depending on where you line it up across the world, this is unusual in being that early and not religious. Um and we've got some mentions of it being witnessed by Spanish priests in both the 15th and 16th centuries. Um, and the fact that the Spanish witnessed these plays, I think, plays a part in how the Spanish are going to introduce Western style theater to the Aztecs. Um, when we look at the Aztecs, again, it's a multi-group alliance forming around 1428. Um, colonial common era. See, I just keep talking about colonialism, and I'm just going to throw that C in everywhere. Um, and pre-Spain, we do have a couple major festivals that again have theatrical elements. One, there is a festival for Quetzalcoatl, because Quetzalcoatl is super important. And you also have a spectacle for Huitzilopochtli, I think. I think. Um, Nahuatl is not my strong point. Um, and so you've got with the Aztec the stuff you need for theater to happen. You've got enough population that you've got, a good place for an audience to grow, and you've also got enough leisure time to do stuff for entertainment. And the Aztecs are, you know, they got a lot of money, they got a lot of influence. Um, their empire is not going to last super, super long thanks to Cortez landing in Mexico in 1519 and a massive pile of conquests. When we're looking at these pre-Spanish festivals, the annual festival for Quetzalcoatl, who is a creator god. He's associated with the wind, arts, crafts, knowledge, learning. Stole, maize to give food to humanity. So very, very important. And so the festival um was like 40 days of reenactments, dancing, and performances. Because he's so important. He gets 40 whole days of that. Um, the other described festival is the Festival of Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird on the left. And this is the patron deity and the god of sun and warfare. Um, and this god was conceived at Snake Mountain, where his mother tucked a ball of feathers into her clothing, and there is a particular dance that characterized this, which is called the snake dance. And the snake dance is a festival dance that was apparently, according to priests talking about it, um, so rapid that the performance would just be left completely breathless. You also see mock battles. So you've got images of the god, being carried around to pursue, and then you've got other presentations of brothers. And you'll have an effigy of a fire snake who's got red feathers for the tongue and a huge paper tail, and it's carried down the pyramid to represent the mountain. Um, and so there's also a sculpture of Huitzilopochtli's sister, whose dismembered body is laid down at the base. So there's all of these very, very theatrical elements. It's telling this myth with puppetry, with dance, with music. Um, but it is still serving this ritual performance of connecting with the gods. Um, One of the other um, pre-colonial performance traditions and rituals that is actually still practiced is the Danza de los Voldares, the Flying Men. Um, and it's believed to have originated with the Nahua, the Huastec, and Otomi peoples in central Mexico. And um, it probably dates back to somewhere in the 15th century, possibly in response to a drought. It might be even older than that. The practice of the Valdares was heavily suppressed by the Spanish. Um, the fact that it persists and that it can still be found is a pretty good testament to, I think, the endurance of the people, that they're like, yeah, you tried to stop it, but it's back. Um, and this the Valdares, basically, you've got a massive 50-foot pole that gets put up in the air, and then five young men climb the pole. One of them is a musician, and then four of them are the flyers of the flying men. Um, the fifth man balances at the top and is playing music, and then the other four jump off, and they've got ropes tied around their ankles, and they descend. They fly down to the ground and dance to the music. Um, this is believed to have pleased the rain god Tlaloc, as well as other gods, where rains will begin and fertility will return. Um, Despite, again, this practice being suppressed by the Spanish, it's still done today. The difference between it being done now and it being done pre-colonialization is it's really been divorced from that ritualistic meaning. So it's treated much more like this is part of our tradition and part of our heritage, and less geared towards actual worship. Um, Questions so far, and please don't hesitate to ask questions or drop stuff in the chat, because I do have the chat open. Um, One of the other things that you'll see with the Aztec pre-Spain are the Flower Wars, which are absolutely Hunger Games for pre-colonial Mexico. And this we've got ritualistic mock war. It's mock war, but people really do die in the Flower Wars. Um, a lot of the really flashy weaponry we tend to associate with the Aztec is often found in artwork depicting the Flower Wars. So they're weapons that might not be the most practical for real war, but are really great for a ritualistic ceremonial war. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Nahuatl. Um, Now understand that this is still the most widely spoken indigenous language in Mexico. There are still over 1.5 million speakers of Nahuatl. Um, and it was kind of the lingua franca of Mesoamerica. It's the primary language for the Triple Alliance. So if you wanted to do business, um, then you're dealing with this language. And pre-Spain, this is a pictorial language. This is a pictorial language and an oral tradition. Then we've got Cortez, we've got the Spanish, we've got them coming over and establishing a very strict um, hacienda system and class system to set the Spanish above and apart and control the indigenous people. So you've got all of this control over the native people, and then you've got a real mission, mission, um, happening with the Spanish. Um, Spain in Europe, you've got the Protestant Reformation happening. You've got lots of changes happening in the 16th century, 15th and 16th century in Europe with the Protestant Reformation, and that affects theater because European theater was largely Catholic. Spain stays Catholic, and Spain stays adamantly Catholic. And Spanish theater is always a little different than what we see other places. In part because of El Andalus and the Reconquista, and so it kind of gets into the religious vernacular theater late, but it also holds on to it. And so in Spain, you have a form of theater called the autos sacramentals, um, which are one act plays that are Bible stories, little bit of morality play and how to be a good person, stuff from the lives of saints, miracles of the saints after they died, but they're all very explicitly religious and very explicitly Catholic. In Spain, these would have been performed on carros, which are basically big parade floats, would be performed in big public squares or in processions. So you've got in Spain these big spectacle-driven religious plays. As the Spanish are in Mexico and looking at all of the indigenous people, Spain has a goal. Spain is going to take all of these people that they have conquered and are trying to force into their system, and like, well, we've got to save their souls. We've got to evangelize to the indigenous people. And so the best way that they thought they could do it would be through theater. The idea being that the spectacle and the storytelling would draw the audience in, and they could use theater to educate and evangelize. I mean, it makes sense. How many of us who were raised in a Christian tradition have seen a Christmas pageant or an Easter play where you learn the Bible stories by watching them being played out? But of course, it would not be very successful to put these plays on in Latin or in Spanish. If you want to evangelize to a population, the most effective way to evangelize is in their own language. And so, and not just through plays, but also in general, getting the scripture into Nahuatl was very important to the Spanish. And so, with the Franciscans basically worked on taking Nahuatl, which again had a pictorial language, and phoneticizing Nahuatl and converting it to using Roman letters. So there's an effort on the part of the Catholic Church to convert Nahuatl to a language that could just be written in letters. So you're working on getting the scripture translated. But in addition to that, in a piece of brilliance, they're like, you know what? We can translate some plays into Nahuatl. And we know that these plays were performed as early as the 1530s. The earliest one we know about was in 1533 at Tlatelolco, and it was specifically about the end of the world. We also know somewhere between 1535 and 1548, we had a play performed in Tenochtitlan or Mexico City. And the Mexico City play had a cast of over 800 performers. 800 performers. So this was a massive play. Um, the costumes for these suckers would actually often come from effigies in the church. They would take clothing from the effigies as well as vestments to costume the shows. So you've got a massive cast, and the major characters are being dressed in essentially sacred costuming and sacred clothing. Because consider the images of saints are often dressed with silk, with brocade, with gold and silver embroidery. So again, you've got a lot of people, you've got a big stage, you've got a lot of spectacle, you've got beautiful costumes. The idea is to make these plays very appealing to really sell these stories. The oldest extant script that we know was performed in the Americas, so just straight up, the oldest extant script that was performed in North and South America is from 1591. And this is a Miércoles Santo or Holy Wednesday play. And there are no other scripts from the 16th century in the Americas. That just there are no other surviving ones. The one that does survive is a Nahuatl, which is what got me started on this whole rabbit hole to begin with, is the idea that this is the oldest script from the Americas. And the discovery of the Holy Wednesday play is actually pretty late. We've got post 1600 plays. We've got a fair number of post 1600 plays. Um, but the Holy Wednesday play actually was lost for not just decades, but centuries. It was discovered. This particular script was actually not discovered until 1986. So there's still stuff being found out about these plays because we're still finding documentation and texts from, that far back. Um, when it comes to these plays, passion plays straight up are the most popular form of Nahuatl drama. Um, And in these, Christ is almost always depicted as a sun figure. Not sun like descendant, but sun like big glowy day star sun. Um, they are often larger than life, very mythic in scale, and these plays put a lot of emphasis on things that the Franciscans and Jesuits really wanted to emphasize for their intended audience to kind of hammer home how they wanted that population to behave. So there is a lot of repeated theming about obedience and about respect for masters, respect for rulers, respect for air quote betters. So obedience is a repeated theme, and confession, the trying to hammer home the idea that confession is very important, that people should contemplate and then go to a priest to discuss their sins, and the idea that sins were punished, that you should be conscious of your sin because there are consequences which are going to happen. Um, the other major theme is sexual purity, um, especially sexual purity for women. Um, Now, if you're dealing with, nobility, sure, a woman's virginity before marriage is really, really important because it's all tied up with political things. But if you're just a regular, peasant, virginity's not a huge deal before Spain happens. Um, if anything, you kind of have this culture of good time girls who are going to follow the warriors around and have some fun. And this wasn't stigmatized, it wasn't a big deal. But the Catholic Church looks at this practice as like, oh no, 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 that's really bad. That's doing all of this, sex out of wedlock. These women are basically prostitutes. And so you've got, all of this like, yeah, no, we've got to make sure that the Aztecs understand sexual propriety. So we're going to bring this up in the plays. Um, and so you'll depict in the plays to, explain why it's so bad. You will basically come up with really horrific punishments for loose women. So there's one character, Lucia, who her earrings burst into flames and horrifically burn her because she wasn't, acting appropriately chaste. There's another woman who, during the final judgment, her necklace turns into a snake, which then chokes and bites her. So she suffers, an agonizing death for not being a good, chaste woman. Um, but the idea is if we do this big spectacle, when you look at the Spanish plays that are being written, um, and you look at the priest writing about the use of these plays, there's a really strong racist dismissal of the indigenous people's cognitive abilities. To quote one of them, they have no more understanding than what they see. So the idea is they could just use that spectacle and simplify it. And these plays are very often very black and white morality. This is sin. Sin is going to be punished. You've got to be good. You've got to be obedient. You've got to be chaste. So it's very didactic theater, especially the earliest plays. Um, but it's balanced, again, with a lot of shiny stuff to draw the audience in. Um, there's a description of a play from 1539 where they had the Garden of Eden and it had rivers, mountains, as well as a whole like spate of live animals being brought on stage. Um, so when we look at the earliest plays are being written by the Spanish or are translations of existing auto sacramental. But here's the cool thing that happens. This is the cool thing that happens. Um, you've got, you know, schools, church schools that are taking in students, working on teaching them. And then you begin to see Nahuatl communities that are going to then build and staff their own churches because they're being converted to Catholicism. And so they're creating their own churches. Um, the Jesuit schools, are taking in now students. Um, and so the students will do plays. They'll do schoolboy plays. Jesuits are like overseeing, make sure they're doing okay. Um, and when we look at, coming out of these schools and going into the indigenous churches, um, there are some bars on what roles indigenous people could play in the Catholic Church. Um, the most significant one, of course, is that they were barred from the priesthood. So they could do lots of roles within the church, but they could not be priests. Um, but the laity who are working in the Nawa built churches and in those church communities were known as the Teopantlaca, the church people. Um, and you've got the fiscales who were basically assistants to the Spanish priest. So you've got but almost everybody outside the priest might in fact be indigenous. Um, you've got a chapel master to oversee the cantores and the singers. Um, the cantores were often from the local nobility. They had a certain level of prestige. And it's most likely that the cantores had a hand in managing the staging of religious plays. Um, it's also possible that there may have been confraternities who stage plays. Confraternities are basically a group of people who have gotten together to do a thing. Um, for example, I'm going to jump over to Spain, but if you think about the Way of St. James, if you think about that, the Camino, most of the sacred sites along the Camino are managed by a confraternity. So you might have had confraternities to stage these plays. These confraternities likely included women. So we probably had um, women involved once the confraternities got involved. The earlier plays were pretty much all boys and men. This is not unusual coming from European theater. European theater tends to have a lot of restrictions on female performers. So the fact that the earliest plays, again, had restrictions on female performers is not really surprising. Um, we do know, and again, this is post 1600, but I'm working with what I got here. We do know by the end of the 17th century, there were absolutely women on stage. And we know this, of course, because somebody was complaining about it. Um, there was a priest that wrote a really angry screed about how it was so wrong that women were portraying the Virgin Mary. Because how dare a woman portray Blessed Mary? Um, which I don't know, I find that kind of funny. Um, so we know we've got women eventually. I mentioned earlier that they borrowed costumes from church statues. Um, with they had music, they had fireworks. They'd break out fireworks. Particularly either when sinners are being dragged to hell, because you got to have your brimstone and fire and all of those explosions. Fireworks were also popping up if the Antichrist popped up. So you can just it's like the boss fight in wrestling. Antichrist is going to show up. Let's set off some fireworks. Let's go there for the spectacle. Um, Dance was involved in these plays. Not during Lent. You would not have dance in these plays during Lent. It is mentioned in a 1578 Epiphany play that also has an angel dance and it has a shepherd dance. So we do know that there was dancing, and we've got documentation of this in some of the surviving scripts. Now, understand they're doing this, right? You've got both the Franciscans and the Jesuits kind of making sure these suckers are being staged, and the Nahua are not just doing the plays in their language translated or penned by Spanish priests, but as they are educated and converted and are creating their own churches, we then began to see religious plays in Nahuatl written by the Nahua people. So they have taken this form of theater that was kind of imposed on them, and then they begin creating their own new works. So, and this is happening in these community churches. And these weren't published, these weren't sent off to the printers to be reproduced. They're not officially encouraged. Um, but they're being done. The fact that we have any surviving scripts is kind of amazing, because this is sort of like the people are doing this thing. It's not really hurting anything. It's helping with evangelizing and conversion efforts. So we're going to let it continue, but we can't too explicitly support it. So our earliest extant scripts are very messy looking. They are handwritten manuscripts. These aren't being printed or published. Um, One of our earliest kind of collections of plays comes from a Spanish priest, a Nahua teacher, Agustin de la Fuente, who has a collection of works from between 1599 and 1606. Um, and one of the cool things, if you're a language person, and this is actually how I've gotten most of the information on these plays, is looking at the development of language, because you can, through the scripts, watch the development of Nahuatl as Spanish influences Nahuatl. We see the increasing inclusion of loanwords and calques and shifts in syntax from early Nahuatl to a Spanish influenced Nahuatl. Um, so these plays are very often studied because of their linguistic documentation. Um, and the cool thing about these when the plays shift to the indigenous playwrights, um, is because indigenous men were really barred from the priesthood. In these plays, the ones that are written by the Nahua, Jesus is almost always represented as a Mache Huale, which is a commoner class. So Jesus is explicitly depicted as an indigenous peasant in colonized Mexico. And so you've got Jesus as an indigenous peasant, an indigenous man who is being put to death by corrupt colonial authorities. Um, so yes, it's a story about first century Judea, but it's also not. Um, and so one of these recurrent themes that you see, especially in the Nawa penned plays, is looking at specifically stories in Judea and stories about Rome, um, which is kind of subversive, actually. I think it's kind of subversive. Um, you see similar behavior in the Philippines, where the Filipinos take the Spanish theater and are like, you know what? We're gonna turn this around and use it to criticize Spain. So Spain kind of makes their own bed. Uh, I'm sorry, I will absolutely slander the Spanish. Um, Also, again, this is a bit post-period for us, but I think it's important to talk about. Um, in Mexico, the first secular drama that was performed in Mexico was developed in around 1640. And um, you've got it being adapted into Nahuatl by Don Bartolome de Alva Ixtal Equal. Ish. Um, that's a lot of name, and I know Ish in anyway. Who was a man of mixed Spanish and native ancestry. Um, and he had royal blood on his native side because, again, like the Cantores, a lot of the higher church people came from the noble classes within the indigenous population. And he's also notable because he was one of the few mestizos who was allowed to join the priesthood. So you do eventually see natives being allowed to join the priesthood, but that's not until the 17th century. Um, so 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 yeah. So you've got theater being brought in by the Spanish, kind of playing on an indigenous tradition of spectacle and of performance and of public performance, and often sacred public performance. So taking that tradition, repurposing it, and using it to evangelize, but you've also got reclamation in learning the tools and then creating new indigenous plays. So so yeah, the surviving indigenous plays from all of the Americas from the colonial period, the only ones we've got are these Nahuatl scripts from Mexico, dating all the way back to the 16th century. Um, there are a couple books about this. They can be a little bit tricky to find. Um, if you've got access to interlibrary loan, one of the best books on this, there's a series by Barry Sell and Louise Burkhart called Nahuatl Theater. And these contain English translations of these Nahuatl plays, as well as transcriptions of the Nahuatl, and linguistic notes. There's a ton of linguistic notes on how the language is working in those. If you want an easier read, there's a book called Aztecs on Stage, and that's just religious theater in colonial Mexico. So if you're just like, huh, I didn't know this was a thing that was going on, both of those can be really, really good to check out. So that's kind of what I had. So I guess the next question is, do folks have questions? No?
I wish I was confident enough to ask an intelligent question.
You can ask a stupid
This, this
question. We love
this stuff
stupid
is this
questions.
stuff is all so new and fascinating that I haven't really had time to process and formulate a question.
This is really outside my main area of specialty. Um, so I'm real frank that, Louise Burkhart is my best friend, because she's done so much scholarship on this. So I'm kind of, in a lot of ways, playing messenger for someone who's done a lot of this work. Um, I just I just I just think it's so cool that, we had theater that early in the US, in like formal theater, versus that messy, it's performance and it's theatrical, but it's also still ritual. Because that tends to be the early stuff we see everywhere. I'm trying to figure out how to develop an African theater class, and I'm looking at like the Ngugan masquerades and things like that. But again, you're looking at that performer as spiritual mediator or emissary, which I think seats it really firmly in religious ritual as opposed to performance. Um, Even our earliest script, which is from our earliest script, is from Egypt, actually, and it predates Greek stuff by several centuries, and it's a passion play about Osiris. But again, it's still deeply religious. So the religious nature of this Nahuatl theater is not at all an outlier for theater. Purely secular theater doesn't become really, really common until post-Reformation. And that's because the Catholics and the Protestants just got so nasty that basically the Protestant government and the Catholic Church both agreed, let's maybe stop with the religious plays for a little bit. Um, so Spain stays Catholic, and so Spanish theater stays Catholic for a lot longer. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Yzma, any questions? Even
Oh,
if this isn't your bag?
I think I'm in the same boat where I am intrigued by a lot of the things that you have introduced me to, but I don't know enough yet to make any kind of intelligent questions. But yeah, this is something that I had never even considered looking at before. Like I obviously have looked heavily into Aztec ritual and religious ritual in that area as part of some of my other work about women's places within the society of Mexico. Um, but I had not considered what that looks like once you put a script to it. Yeah,
And again, a lot of the early stuff, there were probably scripts for a lot of these rituals. Um, because, that it's a
sure,
big, huge thing. You gotta plan it.
of course.
But then they're just not extant.
Hmm.
And that's what's really, when you're looking at anything this old, so much gets lost. And so we've got to work with what we got. It's like we know there were these rituals, but all we've got is a description from a Spanish priest that saw it once, and it's being filtered through all of that priest's biases. So you've got this whole interpretation um, from a colonizing, evangelizing, really biased kind of individual versus a description of purpose and meaning from within the culture. Um, and there's such a concerted effort to destroy the indigenous religion and indigenous culture, you know, so it's really hard to get a lot of this stuff because it was a really centuries long systemic effort at destroying. Um, and that's why I want to talk about the Maya a little bit because I think Rabbanawa Akai, even though it's been, you know, changed and morphed, the fact that it's still practiced, the fact that it managed to somehow slip through the cracks is really, really cool. Um, and like the Voldares, and we've got pictures of the danzas, the Voldares, um, pre-Spain. We've got pictures of the Voldares in art as well as pictures from the colonial era. And the Voldares are still happening, even if their original ritual purpose has been kind of lost. I gotta say, the loss of the Flower Wars is no big loss. We don't need to we don't need to Hunger Games people. Okay? So, um, I do kind of want to dig more in the Flower Wars because they're terrible and fascinating. Um, and you've got that whole gladiatorial aspect because this idea of performative combat as theater and as entertainment is a thing that we do see multiple times and multiple cultures. So it's I think there's some interesting parallels to explore there. So oh, the Flower Wars are basically huge ritual combats. The Aztecs kind of bred sacrifices for them. From one of the conquered peoples, they kind of just kept a little pot of population. Um, and you go into the Flower Wars, again, often not super practical, but really cool looking weaponry and straight up Hunger Games. You are set to fight and set to survive. You get good bennies in the afterlife if you were killed in the Flower Wars. So, in theory, it's good to die in the Flower Wars, except, of course, you're dying, which I would think is not ideal. Putting that out there. So, well, thank you so much for joining me. I was, really glad to have a couple folks. Um,
Yeah, this was
so
really great. I appreciate it.
well, thank you. Um, I do lots of theater history stuff, even though I don't do a lot of American stuff because it's really hard to find things on theater in the Americas before 1600. This is it. This is what I found. So, they are recording this, so it will be going on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so our all of the videos usually go up within about 24 to 48 hours. Probably Friday, you'll probably see the video up on the YouTube channel. I don't know if you're following us yet, but if you are not, you should so that you can catch all of the older lectures as well as some of the new ones. I don't think we've done any language classes yet. Kalanikos did one on scripts, like Aztec scribal work, but I don't think anything linguistic, like nothing specific yet. And I don't think we have anything about music, although I have reached out to a couple of people who are interested in doing music classes about different cultures in North America. I don't have any music classes yet for Mesoamerica or South America, but I am talking to a couple of people who have some music classes that we're trying to schedule out for the early 2026.
Yeah, and if you've got either through your library or through a friendly academic institution, um, there is a resource called the Grove Dictionary of Music, and they've got a couple articles on Aztec music, which I mean they're more in depth than what you're going to find on Wikipedia, things like that. But they've also got good sources there. Um, because I was talking to one of the ethnomusicologists that I work with to be like, listen, where can I find out stuff about Aztec music? And he's like, that ain't my bag, but if you want to learn about this kind of stuff, start with the Grove. So the Grove Dictionary of Music. And you probably need some level of institutional or academic access to get in there, but check through the libraries. And they've got some stuff on Aztec music.
All right. Thank you so much, Catherine, for coming and sharing all of this with us. Your class had so many different avenues that I'm now about to just do some huge rabbit holes. So I
So
really
many rabbit
appreciate,
holes.
yes,
So many rabbit holes.
your notes are incredible, and I'm going to be digging into quite a few of those. So, of course, if you ever have any other desire to come back and teach us about the Flower Wars or any other aspect
Yeah,
of ritual and theater, things like that, we'd be happy
I'm
to have
not
you.
there yet with the Flower Wars, but I really want to do some more digging there because they are, they're just cool. Everybody likes classes about death. Uh,
It does tend to be a very popular class subject. And for
so
those of you who are here, if you didn't hear us at the beginning of the class, we are doing an October class about Aztec myths and legends of the afterlife and the underworld, things like that. That will be October 24th, I believe will be the date. But of course, we'll share around in all the socials once that date is finalized and the time is finalized. So that should be a nice spooky class just in time for spooky season.
yay, spooky season.
Are there any other questions, concerns, or comments before we end out for tonight? Awesome. Thanks again, Catherine. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a lot of fun.